All right. Welcome everyone to another edition of How I Raised My Seed. And my name is Charlie O'Donnell. I am partner and co-founder at Brooklyn Bridge Ventures. And Brooklyn Bridge Ventures is a seed and pre-seed fund that specializes in super early stage deals in and around the New York City area, and across a wide variety of different types of industries. We've done everything from B2B SaaS to physical products to brick and mortar, just anything that can get to kind of venture scale. What I would ask, if everybody who is not me or John or Elise could hop off the video so we can maintain the panel-like aspect of this, and we'll bring everybody back for questions and if anybody has Q&A sort of at the end. So first off, I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves and their companies. So John, if you can give us just a quick context of what your company does and, one or two lines about your background before you started the company.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me today. John Cooper, co-founder and CEO of Overalls. We are in the employee benefit space, and we offer a concierge service to help make people's lives easier. This is my third startup. I've been sort of in and around insurtech, fintech, health tech for most of my career. That's my background.
Cool. And Elise?
Cool. My name is Elise. I am the co-founder of Toki. We are a white label loyalty platform for e-commerce brands, also on the blockchain. So we're a Web 2.5 company. This is my second startup, my first one where I raised venture capital.
Cool. So, we have a mix of folks in the room, some people who literally are currently raising, maybe they have actually taken on some capital, other folks who are, maybe at the day job trying to figure out whether or not the idea they have kicking around their head is something that they should sort of go full time on. So, Elise, I'll start with you. At some point, there was this sort of kernel of an idea, and you had a job that you were excited about. You were working in the startup world at a fast growing company. Take me through the process of this kernel of an idea, or actually I made an assumption. Maybe you decided you wanted to do a startup and went looking for a problem, because sometimes that's the way people do it too. So what was the beginning, and how did you make the decision, and what process did you go through to vet this, to say, this is the thing I should spend my full time working on?
Yeah, I think it was the former. I, having done a startup before, knew how much energy it would take and commitment. And so I was really looking to not do another startup myself. And I tried to talk myself out of it for a long time. So the time period between me thinking about the idea and actually leaving my job is like a 7-month period. So what I started to think about this idea, and I told my mom about it, my brother about it, and they said, keep your job. But as a founder, it really wouldn't go away. It was kind of one of these things that I just couldn't stop thinking about. And it's in e-commerce, and I've spent a majority of my career in the space. And so I felt pretty confident in my ability to navigate the problems and solutions within it. And so that gave me sort of a baseline of confidence. But there's a lot more to it than that. So I kind of, once I knew this idea wasn't going to go away, I realized I needed to figure out a way to communicate it to other people to see if I was, not crazy, and if this was really something. And so I sort of compartmentalized it and thought, once I find a way to communicate this idea, I need to vet it first with customers and second with investors. And if I can get buy-in from both of those categories, then I should do this. And so that was the beginning for me. And for me, I'm a very visual person. And so I really wanted to wireframe out the idea and be able to share visuals with people. And so that was the first step. And it was absolutely atrocious. Like I think you saw it, Charlie, but I was really like, I'm not a product designer. I know my way around Figma, but it was like pretty bad, but it was enough to get across the concept of what I was looking to accomplish. And so first building out some like early UI of the idea, and then bringing in more formal design partners to create like a deck was kind of the first step. And those two things I think I might have also written I had like a 3-page document kind of explaining my concept as well. And so I started sharing that with potential customers first, and then investors actually much later.
So I think the key thing there, which I really appreciate, is the fact that you went designers first, as opposed to a lot of people go developers first. And they say, well, let me get to a prototype, which A, can be much more expensive, but B, the design process at least gets you to the point of like knowing what you should be building, and allows for much more flexible feedback. So I think, and it is a communication process, right? Like you literally wrote a thing to describe the concept on paper and described it in a visual and application sense for here's what it would be. And I think you can get a long way, because I'll tell you from an investor perspective, I'm pretty sure that unless you're doing like Neuralink, whatever you can design on Figma is buildable.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea that you have proved something just by building it, to me, doesn't really make a lot of sense in today's world anymore. And so it is much more interesting to see like, what is it that you are building? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs can get further on less money by doing that before they, go hire an engineer to go build a prototype, which may or may not actually be the best version of what they're doing anyway.
Yeah. One of my investors the other day said that Figma sales is a real thing. And we've leaned on that.
With my, sorry, I'm fiddling with my AirPods and accidentally opened them up, and they became the default audio for this. Sorry. You guys can hear me? Oh, okay.
Yep, we hear you.
John, what about your case? The initial origin and the vetting that you should actually quit your day job.
Yeah. So first off, I wholeheartedly agree about these sort of rapid prototyping. That's, I think, one of the like big shifts in the way startups think is we used to talk about MVPs as like build the minimally viable product, but now it's really build the minimally viable clickable prototype, user testing, vet it. In my case, so I had always sort of been starting and tinkering with things since I was a little kid. I started like when I was 8, the junior detective agency, which eventually turned into like a lemonade stand and all that. And when I was in business school, I started a business, and then I sort of went into like regular corporate world. And I always thought I'd be an entrepreneur. When my first son, I have 3 children, when my first son was born, though, that was kind of this like wake up call. I was like, okay, like if I'm going to do this, it's now. I've got, 4 years before he becomes really expensive. So this is my window. And that was really the catalyst to like take the risk. And I was lucky enough that at the time I'd been working on something I was really excited about within the company where I worked. And they had a leadership change, and they basically sidelined this project. So I convinced them, hey, let me take this IP that we've developed, let me spin it out. And that became my last company. We sold that business at the beginning of 2021. I thought I'd be with the company that acquired us. And I realized that like, once you've been sort of an entrepreneur for 10 years, it's really hard to go back into a large organization with a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of people. So I was itching to get out. And was lucky enough to partner up with a venture studio as sort of an entrepreneur in residence and vet an idea around employee benefits, which became Overalls. Early on, we did a ton of user interviews, testing, market fit type of stuff. And a lot of that was done by the venture studio. I was fortunate to come into sort of a pretty well vetted idea. But I sort of think of a concept market fit. Like the concept had been vetted, it had been validated. We knew there's a good addressable market. We knew the competitive landscape made sense, all that stuff. But translating that to an actual product and what is the product that will actually get people to click, get people to buy was what I saw as like our first order of things we needed to go and figure out.
So, John, I have a question about the venture studio and all of these types of deals. There are a lot of founders, especially when they start out on their own, that are like, okay, I'm literally starting out with nothing. Like I need all the help in the world, and they run into various forms of help, and that comes in the form of like accelerators and various co-creation partners, let's say. Do you have any advice for people who run into firms and entities like that for how you would vet their value? Because you've done this before. You went end to end previously and did a startup and exited it. So I'm curious what the studio shared with you that made you think, okay, whatever cost, whatever chunk of equity they got was like valuable enough for you to partner.
Yeah, good question. And so over the course of the last two companies, like I've probably done 3 or 4 accelerators. This was my first sort of venture studio model, which is quite a bit different than an accelerator. And this was the first time I felt like I really got a ton out of it. And I was cynical going into it. But I do think they sort of address, there's this sort of unaddressed market of founders where you've got people who are willing to bootstrap, eat ramen noodles and start with nothing. And then on the other end, you've got repeat founders who have built up sort of a war chest and they can afford to bootstrap for a period of time. And then in the middle, there's a bunch of people who want to start a business. They do a great job starting a business, but they're not quite at that stage of life where they can take either one of those two financial risks. I found myself in that middle zone, right? Sold a company. We had a good exit. I have a bunch of kids. I'm not ready to go and bet it all. And the venture studio gave us a path there. But as I said, I was cynical. What really gave me conviction was talking to the other portfolio companies, talking to the other founders. And in many cases, a lot of their portfolio had outstanding track records, had grown, and had seasoned repeat entrepreneurs as repeat founders as their CEOs. So that really got me comfortable with it. But you pay a price. It's like having, the way I think about it, it's like having another co-founder. It just so happens to be this co-founder is an entity versus an individual. And, in our case, it's been fantastic. We have, the way I think about it is like, I've got a marketing agency, I've got a finance agency, I've got a PR agency, and so on and so forth. That is just attached to our business. That's allowed us to move a lot faster. And, I'm essentially paying for that in equity.
Gotcha. Okay, so you decide to go forward with this, and at some point you say, okay, I need to fundraise. I'm going to put together a deck. So the question I'll ask is just on deciding the strategy around the raise and how much you wanted to raise. How did you come up with the number and the goals? Because you could obviously do more with more money, but at some point you said, okay, this is a reasonable amount of money to ask for. This is a reasonable set of goals. And John, I'll just ask you to sort of keep going on your,
Sure.
Initial fundraise.
So in our case, we were lucky enough to start with a decent amount of working capital through the venture studio. And we were able to hire up a really good team. So we raised what I'd consider to be really early. We were pre-product, pre-revenue when we were raising our sort of seed round or seed extension round. And the market has shifted dramatically from, we made the decision out in December or November. So it was kind of still a pretty good market to now. But at the time, our thought was, let's make sure we have enough runway for, basically what I thought about is I want enough time that we can get our product out, get our first set of clients, expect that it's not going to go well for the first 3 to 6 months, iterate, tweak, get it going well in the next 6 months, and then go out and raise for 6 months. So we wanted to have essentially like on the low end, 15 months of runway, on the high end, 18 or so months of runway. And we really tried to plan around that window. And I found, for what it's worth, I found like when we went out to be, I think it's really hard to go out and fundraise right after you launch. You either go right before you launch or you go after you've launched, you've had time to fix it. But it's very rare from what I see that your first launch, you hit everything right on the head and everything's going great.
Yeah, well, and to think about it from the VC side, I'm literally 3 months away from getting some good initial directional numbers. So why would I bet right now? There's sort of no good reason. And actually, when you consider sort of how long it takes to get around together and to actually close, the awkward timing of this could be that by the time I actually write the check, I will probably know whether or not I will regret writing that check or not, at least like right out of the gate. So from a VC perspective, unless it's, look, if somebody generates enough interest in their round that it's like either you do it now or you don't do it at all. But like the VC world tends to be pretty much in lockstep with itself, that like you either kind of get everybody or you don't get anybody. And so it's unlikely when you hold on, I need to put my AirPod somewhere else. I need like an old school fidget spinner. Otherwise when you're on the verge of getting data like that, important data, or initial clients or something like that, if I could wait 2 months, like I'll probably just wait 2 months, or at least the market will, even if I don't. Elise, what about you in terms of your timing? Because you also, you needed to build with that money too, right?
Yeah, I also raised early, pre having anything, and it was really hard. I think that at the time there was this overarching concept and ecosystem that you could raise off of nothing, off a piece of paper. And I think that for some founders, they were able to do that. For myself, it was very hard. I was able to do it, but it was very hard. And so we heard a lot of what you're saying. A lot of investors say, we think you're onto something. This is really interesting. We're going to wait till you launch. And I thought, that's unfortunate. You're an investor. Like, why not kind of like, I thought risk taking was a part of the job, but in hindsight, it makes perfect sense. I mean, why not de-risk everything that you possibly can, if you think the opportunity will be there in the next round. So, but we did end up raising from funds that had experience in crypto as well as experience in B2B SaaS, which was really a perfect fit for us. And
how
so,
long did you decide to raise for, and where did you come up with your number?
yes, our number was more of a target. It was higher than really what we needed to build the product, but we didn't quite know. We knew as a company in crypto, we might need a little bit more cushioning. We might.
Oh, did we lose you?
That could cost us a lot of money. We might find that the prices of, to have a validator node, it might be more expensive. So I sort of made a 12-month P&L projection of what I thought the thing should look like. And I was very, careful and inflated some of the categories that I thought we might need to spend money on, and gave ourselves like 18 months of runway as well. And so I am very glad I did, given the market and timing. And I think we're in a pretty good position to decide what we want to do with that going forward. But it was definitely it was just kind of a careful number, honestly. And it was probably giving up more than I needed to so early on, but it was what I felt comfortable with.
So I'll make a comment on something you said about being hard. I think there's levels of difficulty in the fundraising, and I think it's very difficult to level set, right? Because you say that your fundraising is hard, but there's probably a vast majority of people out there that go out and literally just don't raise. So like
Yeah.
your raise was easier than theirs because theirs was successful, right? But meanwhile, there's somebody else who exited a company for a bunch of money and whose previous investors told them, just whenever you want to do something, there's $2 million waiting for you to do it. Just send us a one-pager. And your raise was much harder than that person's raise, right? And I think that's important to consider. Is that like fundraising is difficult regardless, right? And I think some of the problems in it is like sometimes the process itself makes the pitch better. Like when you, like Elise, how many people did you wind up like literally reaching out to at all?
Oh gosh,
Roughly
70.
Right. Okay. Was your 70th pitch the same as the first one?
Absolutely not. Yeah, I completely agree with you. The iteration from the feedback that you get is tremendously helpful in your product positioning. And it continues to be so post, right? Like you're always iterating on what the positioning is.
What were some of the things that when you first pitched that you kind of learned about how to tell the story by the time you got to the end, you were like better at, or would, cut VZs off at the past with?
Definitely got a lot better at reading my audience. I mean, that's the most important part, is actually asking questions at the beginning of your pitch to kind of level set and understand with what depth you need to get into on the product and the category that you're in. Particularly with us being in this like kind of new space of like crypto and commerce, I needed to sort of vet people on their understanding of commerce and their understanding of crypto. And I think that was a very, very important part. Cool.
John, as someone who is not your first time around for entrepreneurship, there's some folks who have built things in the past, or maybe fundraised before, and I don't know if you took any money for the previous company after the spin out, but I'd be curious as to like your take on the market and being an entrepreneur today versus like 10 years ago, and how is the landscape different for somebody who feels like, yeah, I've done this, but like maybe not for a little while?
Yeah. So in the first company, we did take in, Angel, and I feel like as you're describing that spectrum, the first time around, it was very much like that. We talked to tons of people. It was so difficult to raise, and we eventually raised, but it was like angel checks here and there and just sort of cobbling it together. And it felt like 6 years of bootstrapping before we had like our first real institutional check that really accelerated stuff. I think in part that was because, I didn't have a track record, but also the market was much more risk adverse 10 years ago than it is now. There's a whole ecosystem around very early innovation now that exists that, was rare. At the time, there was like Y Combinator and 2 or 3 funds that focused on super early stage stuff, but not a lot else. And also just from it was really like, I don't know, it was 2012 and it was not that early, but it felt pretty wild and crazy to go out and start a company then. Like now it's become a lot more the norm, and it's a great thing to do. Then people are like, you're insane. Like, are you really going to do that? It felt like the early days of like punk rock or something like that. But yeah, I mean, now the ecosystem, it's still like, I don't know, in this round, we probably talked to 40, 50 funds as well. And so it's always going to be hard. It's always going to be a lot of work. What we ended up doing is we talked to maybe 15. We heard the same thing back from all 15. We're like, okay, there's obviously a problem we need to address in our story here. And it was about like, you're so early. We have, the way our business works is we've got two clients. We've got an employer, and then we've got the employee that, you know, both need to buy essentially for us to generate revenue. And we didn't have data on either. So we said, okay, let's at least spend the next month gathering as much data as we can, as much learning selling into employers. So we built up this like wait list. We ended up with like 30 companies on a wait list who said, yes, I want to roll out overalls when it's ready. And that became the validation that we needed to get investor confidence when we went back out. But I think you really can use that as a learning opportunity too, those discussions.
And how did you get the sense that it really was this piece of data? Because I'll like even criticize my own peer group here. Sometimes VCs use the too early as, I actually hate this idea, but I'm going to use the too early to basically be like, yeah, I'm super excited, but come back to me later, which is sort of a little bit of code for like, I'm never funding this, except if I'm totally wrong about this and you just happen to be minting money later, come back to me with like an awesome deal. But for the most part, I'm passing, but I don't want to pass. But it sounds like, you know, given that you 15 people said you don't have this data, and then you got the data, and then you were able to successfully raise, it did sound like that was actually a real pushback. At any time, did you think like, no, maybe this is just a bad idea, or this is like BS feedback or whatever? How did you take that as like, no, like, I think we would actually be able to raise if we got this data? How did you figure out that was real?
So I may be overreaching here, but what I think really happened is, and you're in a conversation with someone, you can detect if they have true conviction in what they're doing or if they still have questions themselves. And I found that process of getting the data, and we adjusted our pitch, we sort of, a supporting character became the lead character in our show, essentially. But through that, and you know, talking to a bunch of employers and getting 20 of them to sign up, it went from a theoretically good idea to something that I felt, you know, was very easy to be persuasive about because I had so much conviction in it through that experience. And I don't know, but I would
Your
guess
confidence,
that
your
might,
confidence level changed.
yeah. I think it went from something I think is a good idea to like, I now know it's a good idea and you're crazy for not believing me because look at all this data.
And I'll tell you, I definitely can see that in a meeting where it is very obvious who knows something it's a good idea and who thinks it is. And let me tell you, founders will swear up and down that they know it, and it's still that they think it, because somebody who knows it has literally actually spoken to the buyer. The buyer has been very specific about what they will pay for such a thing, or they were the buyer previously and they know, like, I think it's very hard to level set as a founder of like, what level of conviction is actually knowing something. It's, to me, I call it like people who've done their homework or people who haven't. And there's like another level of homework that some founders don't realize exists. I was just actually talking to a founder the other day who, actually, interestingly enough, it was another sort of two-sided market play. And he was a member of one side of the market that in his peer group, he felt was very excited about the idea, but the other half of the market, he didn't know nearly as many people as he did on his side and hadn't had nearly as many conversations. So he, you know, for him, it was like, I know my side wants to, and isn't it obvious that the other side would want to? And it's like, it seems obvious, but I don't know. I've never actually talked to those folks, and I've never asked them about why they buy that thing. And so that was a missing part of the conversation that I'm not sure he actually thought was missing. He felt very confident about it, but it was clear that he hadn't done that homework. So that's super important.
Yeah.
Cool. So, all right. So Elise, you start to get some interest. Did you wind up with a traditional lead? Like what were the sort of dynamics of like getting from some people saying yes to actually closing? And I'll ask, like, was there a traditional lead? Like, how did the price happen? Did you start to close? Like, what were actually some of the closing dynamics here?
We got a lot of intros. So I made my list of, 50 or so investors I wanted to talk to. And from that list, it kind of became this sort of tree, where one investor would introduce us to like 5 more. And it kind of showed that they were either interested or wanted to be educated in the space. And I didn't kind of know the difference between the two, but there's a clear difference. And I wish I would have known that. But either way, we said yes to every conversation. And we ended up having a few people that were kind of just like really rooting for us. And one of them, it was a little bit unclear if they were going to be the lead or co-lead. But they ended up introducing us to our lead, and then they participated. And so I think in some instances, the lead will then
Let me ask a specific follow-up question about that. So somebody says, I want to invest. Maybe we'll lead, maybe not, we could lead or whatever. Let me go intro you to somebody. And I've seen a lot of times people show interest and make the intro. Did they specifically commit to an amount of money before they made that intro?
They gave a range. So
Okay.
they said, if we're really excited and we can get this other fund in, we'll co-lead for the higher end amount. If they're not really that into it, we'll do a lower amount.
Okay, but they committed either way.
They kind of verbally committed. They kind of said, here we are. And
Definitely verbally committed, or kind of?
it was like 60%. I was like, I'm not taking.
Oh, I lost you for a moment.
I've heard a lot of things. I'm not sure what any of it means. I think I lost you guys for a second. But no, I was not bought in. What words are words. I was like, I'm going to continue to do everything in my power and talk to everyone and continue this journey, because telling me verbally that you have a range is like a 60% commitment. I mean, nothing felt certain until I saw the money in our bank. It was like, that's when it's real. And so, and we, again, back to sort of our sort of Web 2.5 problem, had a lot of people that wanted to have crypto funds in our round. And that was not something I'd focused on at all. I had talked to very few crypto funds. I thought that will be something we'll work on next round. We really don't need to think about sort of the tokenomics and stuff like that till later. I just want consumer funds in this round because they can help us with go-to-market. And so my strategy in my head was kind of wrong. And so I really had to kind of then do fancy footwork to talk to more crypto funds and try to get them sort of interested super early. And so that was kind of the dynamic at play with that fund. And so it still kind of worked out where I think that they realized that they had really done a lot of work on their end to get excited about what we're doing. And even though the specific crypto fund that they wanted in did not come in, they saw that there was potential down the road. And so, and they knew the other funds in the round. So we ended up, and I guess what I was going to kind of say is that, as you know, sometimes if you're going to lead around, you might have other funds you want to come in with you. And I had so many conversations and had this concept of what I wanted in the round that we didn't have our lead kind of fill out the round. We sort of said, we'll take it from here and figure out the rest of it. And so that's kind of how it worked. We kind of found more capital fill out the round, and it all worked out, though many times throughout, I wasn't sure that it would.
Gotcha. And the lead set the price, or did you give any indication as to what you were looking for?
Yes, I gave an indication, and they set the price. I sort of said, I would like to be in this range, and they said, this is what we think you should be. And I then spent some time kind of shopping around and seeing if I could move that up. And it felt like I was in a good spot. And at the time, I felt like it was low for, in the crypto space, we were seeing companies raise, I don't know, you can probably tell me, but like pre-product $50-100 million post valuations. And we were much lower than that. And I was very, just I think insecure about that. And in hindsight, best thing that could have ever happened to us. I mean, we're like on the higher end for a Web2 company, pre-product, and I feel super safe in our abilities to justify this valuation and future ones going forward. And so it really could not have worked out any better. But it was, it certainly wasn't, I did not feel like I was in control of the valuation at the time.
By the way, all of those companies who raised at $100 million post valuation are going to have a really hard time if they have not already had a really hard time right now. So,
so scary. Yeah,
for sure. I'm really glad that you had the wherewithal to realize that unless it's signed, sealed, and delivered, that it is not quite there. Because the reason why I was harping on that is there is a lot of, if this person comes in, will come in kind of dynamic, which isn't quite a commitment. And I've seen a number of times people tell me how much traction they have in their round when you poke at it and it's a little house of cards, and ultimately that person who's been spending some time with you doesn't come in, and then other people don't want to come in, and so it's really important to consider. John, when you one thing I wasn't clear about in terms of putting together your raise was the partner, the studio. They put some money in. Were they essentially the lead of your round?
No, so the way it worked is basically at inception, it's as opposed to starting a book with, starting a business with zero in your bank account, we started with a good amount of working capital. And that gave us that sort of, skipping the bootstrap phase, that gave us the first 6 months of runway to sort of get it together. But we did an external sort of institutional round that we closed in March timeframe. And the only difference between that funding event and then ones I've done in the past is I would say that the venture studio was super helpful in that process. Like, my list of 50, 35 of those came from warm introductions to the venture studio. As opposed to like round one with my first business, it was, each one you have to try to figure out, how do I get to this person? And it's, through 3 or 4 introductions, it's just very hard it's easy to write the list, but it's very hard to actually get the warm introduction to the 50 people on your list. And that became much easier. In our case, we ended up, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, go ahead. I'll hold on to my question.
So in our case, we ended up raising from a great institutional lead. They weren't on the original list. And the way we got to them was through that sort of process that I described earlier of like going out and just talking to a bunch of employers and essentially pre-selling the product. One of them was an early stage startup. They're like, our lead investor does a ton of stuff in your space. You should talk to them. And serendipitously, we were introduced, and indeed, they did a ton of stuff in this space. And they were great. And, the valuation was fine and all that. But also what was really good about it is they just like really were hands-on and knew what we were doing inside and out. It has been, I wouldn't underestimate the value added side of who you pick as your lead investor. People who know the space, who are devoted, who can spend a lot of time with you, goes a long way.
Gotcha. And one question I have about the timing. So you closed in March. So while the market has changed since then, I would say that like there were probably a bit of rumblings about the market sort of changing during that period. And at any time from like the January to March time period, did you feel like you got the beginnings of sort of headwinds, and did that make your process at all difficult?
It was definitely on the radar, on my radar and on the lead investors' radar. I think I felt a greater sense of urgency around, because our plan was to be closed by June, but because it felt from a macroeconomic standpoint like such a trepidatious time, that we just tried to get it done as quickly as we could.
The one thing that I've been, for those folks who are curious about what is the market now and timing and all of this sort of stuff, the thing I've been telling my portfolio companies is basically don't expect new checks this summer. For the most part, VCs are on vacation, dealing with existing portfolio companies, or frankly, like most of them have just gone through a process of dealing with existing portfolio companies to redo their budgets, to make cuts, to decide whether or not anybody would, internally give them more runway or whatever, which is obviously a very strenuous and difficult process. I think for the most part, you won't see VCs come back to market at all until September at the earliest. And I think for the larger the check size you're looking for, the more pain that investor has probably experienced in their existing portfolio. And so, if you're a seed fund, maybe you had some deals that were you were hoping would do better, but now, their plans are delayed, but there's not a lot you can do about it because you're not the big check in the round and all that sort of stuff. So you might come back to market in September. If you're like Series A, Series B kind of thing, you might not have the mental and emotional bandwidth to take on a new deal until 2023 for the most part. So, for those folks who are thinking about the larger rounds, I would say do everything you can to not have to start a raise until 2023, because it's going to be really hard in the fourth quarter. I don't know if you've gotten feedback from any of your existing VCs about that.
We definitely have been hearing sort of rumblings, and I think our original plan was 12 months of runway plus 6 months to raise, and then it turned into how do we make sure we have more runway, and so we're trying to raise more, but part of it's just managing our spending so that we can take that money and stretch it out further. Because in part, like even I'd be curious what you think, Charlie, but my guess is come 2023, while maybe people are deploying capital, it's going to be at a new valuation expectation, a whole new level of valuation expectations. So there's going to be a while for the market to not just start deploying again, but also they sort of get the valuations back in line to where they were late last year, early this year.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things, right? It's like one is like you do have to be super careful about if you raised in your last round was maybe makes the next round difficult. But the other thing is, and actually one of the VCs who was a co-investor in one of my companies said, this could be actually a really great time for some companies who make the really hard decisions and cut anybody who isn't essential, double down on focusing on, revenue and growth and being, super scrappy about it, and are maybe better for it. And maybe through that, trial kind of process, have an even better company because of it. And so I think there's a strong sense of the companies that do go out in 2023 will have no fat on them, will have no, will be super focused on product market fit, and will raise the bar. essentially, that, and that there will be some other companies who, try and cut their way to just lasting, but don't solve for the product side, don't solve for the growth side, and they'll just come out like looking like companies on life support, or looking like slower growth companies, and they just comparatively won't seem as good. So it's easy to say, well, you really need to be careful about spending and all of this other stuff. But if you don't actually continue to grow, you won't be one of the top companies who raises in the first quarter of 2023.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So, okay, so you've gotten commitments, you have a set of investors. I'm actually curious, and we don't usually cover this that much, but I'm curious to go this extra step. You have a set of investors on board. You didn't necessarily have, institutionals or funds on before. How do you set up the relationship? How do you communicate to these folks? What kind of cadence do you have, like board members? How do you manage this group of people that are on the cap table? And is there anything that, like, having all these investors becomes too much, or there's too much scrutiny? And how do you kind of keep them at bay so that you can also focus on running the business? Because there's a balance between like getting good feedback, but also spending all your time writing investor updates. And John, I'll just ask you to follow up, because you've kind of done this a little bit before and now you have this new group. So I'm curious as to your take on that.
Yeah, I feel really fortunate in that our board now it just really is a very diversified board. So I wouldn't say like we make decisions in the easiest way, but we have someone who's a branding expert, we have someone else who's like an ops expert, and they're really sort of complement each other nicely. The way we do it is we have quarterly board meetings, monthly board touch point, and then like a mid-month sort of email update. And that seems to be right. It seems to work well.
That actually sounds like a lot for some people.
Yeah, it is a lot, but I think in general, I don't know, one, we've automated it. So like, our bi-weekly email, or the like, it's let's just say on the 1st of the month we have the meeting, on the 15th of the month we have the email. It's reporting out metrics, but I like it because it keeps people involved. Like, our board is really value add, and it gives them enough that they can do what they do best, versus like my last company, we did quarterly board meetings and that was it. And it was great. And like, we'd go in once a quarter and either get a pat on our back or like, hey, what the hell are you doing type of conversation. And then we'd go back in our hole for another quarter and come back, and we didn't get that much out of it in the more traditional quarterly sense. So I don't know, it'll work, but I feel like it's worth it.
I think the key to what you just said is automating it. When I sit through a board meeting and I feel like someone has clearly produced this deck from scratch for the board meeting, it would, I'm like, this is too much work, right? No matter how rarely you do this, the fact that you literally started with a blank presentation versus, dropping numbers into a format that we have already decided is the clear way to track from one month to another. And I'm constantly telling companies, like, whatever spreadsheet you normally use to track this, just copy and paste, just literally take a screenshot of that and dump it into the deck, right? And because you as a manager need a way to track the company, try and do as little extra stuff in this process. So if that metrics email that pops up should be if it isn't very easy to spit out, then you're probably not getting the right data as the CEO.
Yeah, I mean, we found that it was funny for our first board meeting, as we were putting together that template, it became an exercise of like, oh my gosh, we're doing like these 10 data points we need are bespoke right now. let's go out and automate that. And now it's in Tableau and all that. So it's literally just a data drop from Tableau into a PowerPoint and, we're done. But it made monitoring the business a lot easier on a day-to-day basis.
Gotcha. Cool. Elise, how do you manage your group?
I think hearing that is so helpful for me. I mean, we are so early that I sent our first investor update, like, at the end of last month, just a week ago. And, right now there aren't data points on it. It's kind of general categories of where we are with team, product, sales, marketing, partnerships. And that's kind
You
of.
don't have anybody who asked for a regular meeting?
Yes. So monthly update was kind of just something I wanted to do. And for most of our investors, it's very repetitive. We have one fund that we meet with once a week. We have one fund we meet with every other week. And then the others we're in a Slack group with, and everything else is ad hoc. So it's a lot of touch points.
And do you find that that cadence is helpful? And I don't think there are any funds in this room, so we don't have to. We'll say generally, it doesn't have to be the every other week guys are great, but the weekly guys, they're really pains in the ass, right? You just make a comment about that cadence and.
I think sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And if it's not going to be, there was very clear communication up front between us and the funds that, like, if there isn't something that's burning, like, we'll cancel the meeting. Like, there's no ego about this. And it's nice to have that space and sort of for me to have the time to think about addressing a problem, like, and getting help. But it's not always necessary. And for me, I definitely did clarify in my head what I'm going to go to each fund for based on our prior conversations. I could kind of tell what they're really good at and where they could help me. And so I now, with these meetings, I will come with the specific thing that I think that they will be able to help us with. But next round and in the future, it will be helpful to have everything on a cadence that is aligned with each fund and, like, have a little bit more organization around it, because right now it's a little bit all over the place.
So the one piece of advice, and I want to open this up for questions, and obviously don't want to take up too much of your time. So if anybody has a question, if you use the little hand raise feature, and we'll call you up live for a couple. But the thing that I tell some of my founders is that, like, keep in mind you are one of X number of portfolio companies that I all try and have to keep in mind all at the same time, and I don't necessarily remember from meeting to meeting what was this month's goal. Where were we last month with this number? Were we trying for 15% growth, or were we trying for 20 and we just got 15? Like, the more context that you could provide that is comparable month to month, which is why I like templates that don't change, right? Because after a while, then you're like, oh, I know where that's supposed to be, or I know where we were the last time, because I could literally see the data from the last time, and all you did was, like, add a new column on the end, or fill in the actuals column next to the budgeted column. And here's that same slide, and it used to be all green dots, and now there's green and some yellow, and you pointed out where that changed. That's always helpful information, because this way, it's almost as if each of your investors is living through a meeting's worth of just being in the movie Memento, and they have, like, no short-term memory on the company, and it's like, wait, what did we do as a company again? What is our product true north again? Like, can you just remind me every time, so I don't have to keep it in mind? It just makes the recall quicker. I guess I'm getting some direct side questions, some shy folks who don't necessarily want to come up and do them live. I'll ask you both on the question of minimum viable product. And how did you determine what was a good first version, and whether it was complete enough on what you were trying to build or have built? So Elise, what is guiding you to what the initial product criteria is?
Customer conversation. So the brands that we started talking to like way back in November, up until now, we're still getting sort of inbound interest. Those are completely a guiding light. And that's how we're deciding what feature sets to focus on. I mean, I have this major idea of what we're building, but really to start, it is quite narrow in feature set due to the demand and like what people are asking for, which makes it a bit of a moving target. For us, talking to the right types of customers to be able to iterate quickly for MVP, I think is very important. And so we've specifically made the decision to not be talking to big enterprise customers as a result, because I feel like that will take up a lot of our energy, a lot of our time, and really like narrow us to a position that may not apply to a wider customer base. So we're specifically deciding on MVP features based on our conversations and speaking with really like smaller, more nimble customers as a result, because we think that will allow us to create a product that is sort of speaks to many instead of few.
Cool. John, what about you?
Yeah, similar. I'd say one thing I'm a big fan of is using services like user interviews, user testing. I found that early on, you try to talk to as many friendly companies as you can, but you're going to get friendly responses because they're friendly companies and they don't want to necessarily hurt your feelings. Really, where I feel like we've landed on product market fit is when you build whatever basic, like uninspiring, clickable prototype you can, get it in front of people on a thing like user interviews, user testing. And then when they actually start saying like, oh, can I get this? Where do I go to sign up? That's when I feel like, okay, like we're on to something. And then that's when we'd actually start the software development process. It wouldn't be before that. But that's really what I found to be like the sweet spot from product market fit, is when people are actually asking, can I buy this now? Then you're on to something.
Gotcha. Cool. And we have one live question before we'll let you go. Sharif, do you want to pop on video and ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everyone. I'm just, I have a question about pricing. So in the beginning, how much did the market influence your pricing before you posted it for customers to accept payments, if at all? Yeah.
I've found in both my startups getting pricing right to be super challenging. I found like it was always evolving and we were always testing new pricing models. And yeah, I don't know. We like, for example, in this new business, we have I think it's a brilliant, beautiful pricing model, but it's almost like too good to be true because we're able to offer really awesome services at no cost. And it's like, it's true. People are like, wait a minute, like, what are you up to? Like, this is shady. So we are like, okay, like we'll charge you more. Like we won't offer it free. And so like, it's very counterintuitive. So it's just like, what we've tried to do is almost build our own price elasticity curve where we put up different prices. We see where people start to say, oh my God, that's too expensive. Or like, really, that's it? And when you're sort of getting neither of those, that kind of becomes our price for now. And then competition does something different and all of a sudden you're reevaluating. But that's been my experience. I haven't found like I don't know, a super easy way to do it.
Gotcha. In the interest of time, there's one other question that came in and I'm actually, Elise or John, if you want to jump in with this, reaching out to potential customers pre-product and talking to people before you actually have something to sell them. it must have been very hard to do cold outreach when you like didn't have anything and people are busy. So I'm curious as to like, did you know some of these people ahead of time? Did they know you actually had nothing? Like, how did you get the time of customers before you had something to sell them? Any tricks or tips around that? Elise, you want to jump in there?
Sure. Yeah, I think using as many warm intros as you can get is really critical. And that means it makes it a slower process because you have to buy in the person that is connecting you to the person that you want to be selling to. But I think that's really critical. Again, that'll help you refine your pitch and your positioning as well, because you'll get to understand how that person sees you, and then hopefully they'll say, great, can you send me a forwardable email to the person you want to get connected with? And that's kind of definitely the best way to go about it. And from there, we typically do like a kind of like way back in the day, I was an SDR at an e-com SaaS business. And so it was very much, I'm using that playbook of then having a 30-minute call to understand the customer and their needs and what they're looking for, and then doing a product demo and a different call afterwards. And that's really worked very well.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that real quickly is I think in some ways it's almost easier in the sense that people have like this flip in their brain where now they're providing advice versus being sold to. So I think it's easy to go and ask someone, hey, I'd like your advice on this and your thoughts, versus like, hey, will you sit down for a pitch? So I wouldn't shy away from doing that at all.
So one of the things I'll add, because I often get pitched ideas that either people are trying to sell to VCs or they're trying to sell through VCs as a channel. And there are many things that I'm totally not interested in at all and won't take that kind of meeting. But there are other areas that I really care about, areas around organizational development, talent, like recruiting solutions and all of that sort of stuff, where if somebody had what I consider to be an interesting angle, even if they were super early in the product, I'll hop on that call because I find the challenge intellectually interesting to talk about. And if I have some confidence that the person could come up with a decent solution, I kind of want to influence it, to be honest. I want to be like, hey, I've seen people try and solve this problem many times before. Let me hop on the phone with you so you don't make the same mistake, because that's going to kill the whole thing. Let me try and convince you to add this feature. That's what I would really use. And it has to do with like my interest in the area and my confidence level that you could actually get this thing done or will launch something. And so that's when I'm willing to do it. So I would argue that like, if you can't get meetings through either warm or cold intros, at some point, I think you have to question whether or not this is a painful enough area or an area where there's enough interest in it. Because if there is, people will be like, oh, if you're even have a whiff of solving this problem for me, I need to get on the phone with you. Like that should be part of your bar, right? And if you can't get above that bar, it's like maybe they're just not interested enough in that part of the space. And what does that mean for, when you do actually have a product and you're trying to sell to them, like it's just maybe not that high on their priority level to get that problem solved. So I think it's a big question. Well, listen, folks, thank you so much for spending time with us. Now that you have some money in the bank and you have companies to run, I know your time is super valuable. So we certainly really, really appreciate it. Thanks everybody in the audience for joining. If you do have a New York City area based company that has yet to raise $750K in a previous round cumulatively, feel free to pitch me. It's charlie@brooklynbridge.vc. I have a little calendar request tool on my site, which, cuts out my inbox as the middleman, because as you can imagine, giving away money for a living makes that kind of a mess. So that's always a good thing to avoid if you can. Yeah, we'll add you to our weekly newsletter of events, and we do this almost every other month, and we have a bunch of other stuff that we'll do on a regular basis. So thanks for joining. And thanks, John and Elise.
Thanks for having us.
So long, guys.
Thanks so much, Charlie.
No problem.